Young men where I live toss around racial slurs like everywhere. I have an African friend and a Filipino friend. And the African friend goes up to the Filipino friend all the time and says, "Hey, chink." And the Filipino friend goes up to the African friend all the time and says, "Hey, nigger." This is common parlance. I can think of like 30 guys off the top of my head that use at least like a couple racial slurs every sentence. I'm sure there are those with degrees in critical race bullshit who will tell me about how this is all because of, the critical patriarchy that marginalizes hyper-marginalized, actuated communities and puts them into red-lined, gated boxes in order to oppress them more strongly, blah, blah, blah. And that's all because we live in a more racist country now than we ever did. But, what on earth are you even talking about? You have so many more people these days talking about how racist our country is, and you see so few people anywhere actually doing racist things. So what gives? Why are all these kids throwing out racial slurs, mainly between their friends? I believe that this comes from how, paradoxically, we have such a strong anti-racist push in our society, where you can't use those terms. You can't say that. And it's not just with race. You can't call that guy retarded. You can't call that guy fat. It doesn't matter what it is. Granted, part of this just comes from the fact that if you tell a bunch of teenagers that they can't do X, they're gonna really, really want to do X. Like, why do you think you don't have very many drunkard teens in Germany, which has no drinking age, but you have plenty enough here in the US, which does? Because drinking is that thing that you can't do, because you're not old enough yet. No, no, no. So it's very, very cool, and teens want to do it. In Germany, if you get drunk, it's not a cool thing. You're just an idiot, You're just that stupid drunkard because everybody drinks, but they know to not get too sloppy drunk when they're doing it. So, you're just kind of stupid. But it goes deeper than that. Because this very prescribed, very nice, very euphemistic way of talking really just doesn't fit very well with how young men generally have evolved to interact with one another. Why do you think that best friends among young men will throw just absolutely vicious insults at one another? First of all, that's just how guys mess with one another, and it's so much fun. We don't mean any of it. Like, to all the ladies watching, when we call our friends stupid, worthless loser faggots who do nothing with their lives, we don't mean any of that. We're just being mean just to be mean. But that's also kind of how you measure, is this guy just gonna break down in tears, or is he a little bit more solid than that? Because I'm not sure I know any young man who would, if they called somebody a stupid loser faggot in a friendly way, and that guy just broke down in tears, like, "You call me a stupid loser faggot." I would not be friends with that guy, and I think most of the guys I'm friends with really wouldn't be friends with him either. Part of the reason why teachers and all these other people are pushing this very, very nice way of talking is so that very sensitive people, very stupid people, very fat people, people who are judged for things can be accepted into groups and not be judged by anybody. But young men are going to keep judging them. And, we had an easier way to weed them out before when we could just call them all sorts of horrible things. And we still do call them all sorts of horrible things. And that's how we know who's worth hanging out with and who's a stupid fat loser. And not only is young men interacting with one another in this way just honestly inevitable, and there's nothing you can really do to stop it, but not only that, it's beneficial. Because of the aforementioned, propensity it has to weed out the people who are just kind of too soft to be hanging out with dudes. If you're a dude, you get called a whole bunch of vicious insults, and you break down in tears, maybe go hang out with the girls, dude. Teachers wonder why they don't get any respect from kids, but in part it's because they push so much damn sensitivity. People who are super sensitive, very, in touch with their feminine side, blah, blah, blah. Young men are not going to respect you for that. Young men probably respect the principal who wrestled or played football more than, these kind of skinny intellectual kind of principal. There's an assistant principal I have who played football, and then there's other guys who are just, kind of skinny nerds. And I don't respect the assistant principal, but, I respect him more than the skinny nerds. And also, this push to sort of never mention anything that's bad about people allows people to just keep having bad habits, bad qualities, and they legitimately never get called out about it. Because it's just, you can't say that. For example, people who are legitimately just huge, absolutely undeniably obese. And I guarantee you, everybody who meets that person is thinking, that's a fat ass guy. And and then he walks down the street, and somebody else looks at him. He's like, "Damn, look at them belly rolls." And then he passed by somebody else and like, "Damn, watch him jiggle." But they're all thinking this. And then one guy says, you could stand to lose a little bit of weight, which is not some bad advice. And then everybody looks at him and is like, "You can't say that." And of course, because of that, the fat guy remains fat for the rest of his life, which isn't all that long. And is that doing a service to the fat guy?